Well, good morning. Happy November. I'm Nick Stern, a certified financial planner with Robert L. Stern Financial Services. Thanks for joining me today. Um, it's November. Next week is Thanksgiving. I can't believe it. It's almost the winter, but I guess that's good because that just puts us all the way or that much closer to summer. So for November, I wanted to talk about saving. And I think it's really important to go over this. It's a simple topic, but it's extremely important for us in the near term, midterm, and long term. So there's just a couple questions I really want to answer today. And those are going to be, what is it? What's saving? How do I do it? Or how do I do it most effectively? And why is it important? Well, I think the easiest question there is, what is it? And saving is setting aside money or part of your earnings that you're not going to use in some sort of immediate sense, meaning you're not going to use it to go out during the weekends. It's money that you're going to take from your earnings and you're going to set it aside from your earnings and put it in whatever means you want, whether or not it's an envelope with cash in it, whether or not it's a separate bank account. It's money that you set aside for emergencies or some sort of large purchase or some sort of investment that you want to make that you need to build a nice cash reserve up for. Well, how do I do it? I think the best and most efficient way to save properly is going to be to work out some sort of a budget. And I know that it's difficult to determine an actual budget because things can change. Income can change, whether or not that's up or down. The holidays are coming, so obviously that's going to, tinker with a lot of our budgets. But to get a rough idea of what your fixed expenses are, what you're normally going to spend on going out, groceries, dining your significant other, holidays, having a good sense of that will actually help you determine what amount of money that you're going to be able to set aside. And I think it's really important that you don't overshoot, particularly if you're saving for something long term or you're just trying to build some sort of emergency fund. And starting with something that's probably unrealistic that you can sustain for a long period of time is not the best way to do it. I would actually start on the bottom rung and say, okay, I know I can do this amount. It's not a lot, but I know I can do it. And then over time, as that becomes easier, you increase the amount that you save. And I think that's the most efficient way, and that's the way that you're going to be able to, A, hit all your goals, you're going to feel good about being able to save, and it's also not something that you're just going to miss right away, or it's not something that you're going to have to change right away. So make a budget or have a rough idea of what those are, and for a lot of us, we might have that in our heads, but to really write it down and see it on paper and look at the numbers, I think is definitely going to help you out more than you would think. Plus, you're actually going to see, or you may not know, you may have it in your head that you're spending a lot in some sort of area of your life, but when you write it down, you see it's like, wow, I might be spending a lot more than I'm expecting, and maybe that's something I can cut down, or you can, reassess where you want to spend your earnings, etc. But again, that'll help give you a good idea of where you're spending, where maybe you can cut down on the spending, and where you can start saving. Why is it important? Well, it's important to always have some sort of cash reserve, or what I would like to call an emergency fund. And you think that you might never need it, but even in a position where, hey, you took an interview for a new job, and the new job that you got is great, it's exactly what you wanted, you have to quit yours now, and you don't start the next one until a month. Well, with an emergency fund, it's going to make you, or at least help you be a little less tight from a budgeting standpoint during that transition period. Or the unexpected happens and you get laid off, or something doesn't work out, you have a little bit of backup, so it'll help decrease the stress, but it'll also allow you to be a little bit easier, or a little less tight from a spending standpoint in those times of need, or in a transition period, or if some sort of good opportunity comes up and you really want to invest in that opportunity, whatever it may be, you're going to have that lump sum of cash. It's not something that I would expect to have right away. But again, if you go back to the portion of how do you actually do it, and you budget and you understand where you're spending and understand where you can cut down and or take some money away and start saving, over time you should build up a nice emergency fund or a nice investment fund or whatever you want to title of that as. We've talked about this earlier in the year, but I also want to emphasize that you can have both an emergency fund, which is more of a short-term cash reserve in those transition periods, in the time of need, during the holidays, whatever it may be. But I also just want to touch upon, saving for the long term, and I would say that's retirement, or it doesn't necessarily need to be a retirement account. It can just be an investment account where you're going to put in X amount of dollars a month or quarterly or whatever, frequency that you'd want, and you're going to designate that as a long-term investment so that in 20 years, not necessarily in 5 or 1, but in 20 or 30 years, you're going to have a nice sum of cash that you can, basically do whatever you want with. And if it's a retirement standpoint, you could have the option to take a tax deduction, or from a Roth standpoint, it could grow tax-free. Definitely saving in your employer-sponsored retirement plan if you have one available, and taking care of any type of match. All those are really important, and I really want to emphasize that short-term, having an emergency fund is great, and it's important, particularly for those transition periods. But also, looking much further down the line, it's also really important to think about, and starting that now, even if it's not a lot of money going in at first, you want to think about that extrapolated over 40 years or 30 years, and even if you're putting in $10, $20, or $50 a month into some sort of account or savings account, think about that over 40 years. And think about that, you can put that in an Excel spreadsheet and use whatever interest rate that you want, or even no interest rate, and it's going to be a good amount of money, more than you would probably expect. So with that being said, savings really important. Sit down, look at a budget, write it down, understand where you're spending, and understand how much you can save, and then have a goal. Set real goals of increasing that savings amount. And this is money for an emergency fund. You really shouldn't spend it until there's an emergency. And if there's no emergency, well, then you're building up this great cash fund. And then from a long-term standpoint, looking at some sort of retirement account or looking at some sort of investment account would be, I think, a really good idea, provided that you're in the position to do so. So if you have any questions, there's a number, email at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to contact me through email or give me a call. We're always here to answer questions, no obligation, of course. And thank you again for tuning in. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next month.